Now, Richmond in the AFL didn't have a great weekend. They got done by the mighty Saints, the favoured team of our producer Tom Story. They're supposed to be heading up to Queensland on the weekend to play their next game, but Queensland doesn't want Victorian footballers anymore. What a problem. What a bit of a spanner this throws into the works of an already complicated and delayed AFL season. I'm joined again by Brad Johnson, the former Footscray, former Western Bulldogs champion. Good to talk to you again, Brad. This is a bit of a pain, isn't it, for everyone?
It is a little bit, Chris. We understand the AFL said from the outset that we're going to have that agility about us and all these words that they've thrown out that have become part of the way we talk these days. But it is true in essence that, Victoria is under a bit of pressure at the moment with the virus. So in some ways you can understand the decisions that are being made from the Queensland government. But when it comes to the AFL side of things and the players, each player here and across the country is tested 2 to 3 times a week. They can't even enter their own clubs without being tested and go to main sessions. So if anyone is going to remain reasonably healthy, you'd think it is the AFL players in terms of the type of strict testing and isolation that they do have.
Yeah, and when it comes to NRL, the Melbourne Storm have got around this, I think, by basing themselves in Sydney throughout, haven't they? So that they don't have that issue. So it won't be just Richmond, of course. There'll be other Victorian AFL clubs that won't be able to leave the state under these conditions. So they're changing the game plan. They're changing who you're playing and where you're playing. How difficult is this for the players and clubs to deal with?
Yeah, look, it would be, and it's just more around the preparation, I suppose. That they are so fine-tuned in knowing exactly the breaks that they sort of have between games, and that's what's getting adjusted on the run a little bit. So it's more around the preparation. The players and the clubs, though, they'll adapt and do what they have to. The AFL will make it as fair as they possibly can. If they do need to change games, it will be against other teams that have had a similar break. So therefore, I suppose it evens it up in that sense. That's what they've done with Carlton St Kilda in particular for this week. But it is sides travelling out of Victoria. Whether Victorian teams may have to just leave the state for a few weeks, like what Melbourne Storm have had to do, just so they can continue to play. We'll wait and see what unfolds there. But it's also the Gold Coast Suns, for example, coming to GMHBA in Geelong this weekend to play. So all of a sudden, Gold Coast coming to Victoria, that may stop them going home. So that upsets their season. Their season's been sensational so far with how well they're playing at Metricon. So all of a sudden, it throws a spanner into the works of the Gold Coast Suns. Do they stay in Victoria for a few weeks? Do they then have to go maybe home via Sydney and play a couple of games there before heading back and getting back to Metricon without having to quarantine for 14 days? So there is a little bit up in the air at the moment. We just wait and see now in how things settle down this week. Hopefully things settle down in Victoria over the next week in terms of the amount of cases that are unfolding at the moment. And therefore we can start to create a bit more stability in the season, which we did have in the first month.
Absolutely. There has been a lot said about it today. Let's just check in on a bit of what Gillon McLachlan, the head of the AFL, had to say earlier.
People understand that there's going to be sacrifices made to get this season away. I think we've got a better understanding about how long people can be in the hubs, what are required. I think the restrictions in hubs are getting less and less in other states too, so we can be a bit more flexible there. So it's all about communication and responding to the situation of the day.
Yeah, it's new territory, Brad, for everybody. And, of course, other sports around the world grappling with this as well. Many of them not up and running as well as the Australian sports are now with the AFL and the NRL. Tell me with the AFL, Brad, a lot of people didn't quite understand at the early part of the season why, after the COVID delay, we're having shortened games, shortened quarters. That's just so that they can actually deal with these problems effectively, right?
Yeah, that's right. And it's working out in that way now. And at the start, it was, okay, well, are these shortened quarters exactly what we need in the game? And the players were even asking that question after the comeback game in round 2, whether or not they were getting the most out of the game because of the shortened quarters. I think everyone understands now exactly why that is. And the other thing with Gillon McLachlan's press conference today was if Victorian teams, for example, go and hub in Western Australia, there won't be the strict protocols around what has been for, I suppose, at the start for West Coast and Fremantle and the sides and Adelaide and Port Adelaide that are up on the Gold Coast at the moment. Things are relaxing in those other states. So once the quarantine period is over, if the clubs remain in those hubs, they will have that freedom, of course, to move around a lot more than what we have seen in that first month. So things will open up in the hub. So it might be easier for teams to go and base themselves for 4 to 6 weeks in those states.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to watch. As you say, flexibility the key here, and that's why the shorter games allow that flexibility, I suppose. It's easier on the players. Now, your mob, the Bulldogs, had a good win in Sydney last Thursday night. A bit of a challenge came from Sydney late in the game, but the Doggies were good enough to hold on. My Crows are finished. They've just gone to Queensland to get hammered every week. How do you read the season? Who are the standouts?
Well, at least you're laughing, Chris. Still, that's a positive. Keep smiling, that's for sure. But look, the Western Bulldogs had to turn their season around. The first two games back weren't great, so to beat GWS and then Sydney has given them a lot of confidence. They've got some senior personnel back in that side, which has really helped the star players in Marcus Bonampelli and Jackson McRae. And Tim English, the ruckman, I think has really set them apart the last couple of weeks. Adelaide, it is going to be a big struggle for the remainder of the season. The way they performed, particularly in the first half against the Brisbane Lions on the weekend, was very disappointing. They just can't get any flow to score at the moment, and that's a big part of the game. We're sort of now talking this week around the way the game looks and how things can really improve, just to get that scoring up a little bit, a bit more free-flowing football and out of that complete structure that we see at the moment in the game.
Yeah, well, Peter Beattie last year was trying to convert me to rugby league.
Don't change, Chris. Don't go anywhere.
Now,
it's okay. Adelaide will get through this.
We'll come back, don't you worry. Hey, I've got to show you something, because I saw one of the things I've never seen before in a game of Aussie rules, in the Carlton game here on the weekend, where a game of footy is won by a header. Here it is. The Carlton defender's head. If Essendon, that was a goal for Essendon, they would have won. They're only 2 points down, and the head turns it into a point. That is a header that wins the game, isn't it, Brad?
It is. It's Liam Jones. He's an ex-teammate of mine at the Bulldogs. He's usually a pretty good mark, Liam, but look, it's a little bit different to do that. It's definitely going to be Falcon of the Year, but it did save them the game. It was a swing and a miss by the hand, but completely got him on the scon. But look, and he had a good laugh about it after the game. But if he had have missed it, it was a complete disaster. So a little bit of luck there for Liam.
He had a laugh. Looked like he could have done with a concussion test too, I reckon.